our partners from the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, Peter Rimmel, resident representative, and Pankaj Madan, head programs of the India office. As I always make this remark that this new normal series is our endeavor to stay connected. And what Peter and me have been discussing, this virtual means is actually enabling us to be even more connected than physical aspects. In this, we have been talking about disruption in some way or the other, on some sector or the other. And the market disruption has become a blanket terminology to capture the massive changes affecting businesses. I'm pleased to introduce the distinguished panel from government, industry, and leaders in their respective domains. And more importantly, each one is a thought leader in their own right. A very warm and special welcome to Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, Principal Economic Advisor, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. He's not only an internationally acclaimed economist and best-selling author, he is currently the Principal Economic Advisor to the government and also serves as the co-chair of the G20 Framework Working Group. Prior to government, he spent 2 decades in the financial sector and was the global strategist and managing director at Deutsche Bank. Of course, he has a well-known environmentalist and urban theorist. He has been a visiting scholar at Oxford, adjunct fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies, Singapore, and many other organizations. We also have with us Mr. Yadvinder Mathur, former Special Secretary at Niti Aayog. He was of the 1990 and 86 batch. Before joining Niti, he was chairman and managing director of Exim Bank from February 2014 to February 17. He has long stints in the finance department and the states, including Principal Secretary of Finance, Government of Rajasthan. And he was also Energy Secretary of Rajasthan for over 3 years. He has contributed to setting up a greenfield power plants and interest in entrepreneurship development, infrastructure, financing, regulatory issues, and behavioral sciences. One of the last functions earlier this year that I attended with him was the Women Entrepreneurs Award series. And the other panelist is Mr. Tanmoy Chakravarti, Group Government Affairs Officer, Tata Sons. His primary role is to synergize the Tata Group companies' initiatives to government and to develop a one Tata approach. He has led many enterprises, mission mode, and holistic transformational projects in the area of e-governance in India and other parts of the world. He's worked with several governments across the country, even the Indian government in the Passport Seva project, the UK Home Office, income tax, etc. Tanmoy's first major e-government program at TCS for the government was the Mission Mode Project MCA 21 for the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, which won the Prime Minister's Award for Service Delivery Excellence. We also have Ms. C. Likha, Director Corporate Communications and Brand Reputation, Indigo, currently working as Director Corporate Communications. She has a proven track record of leadership in many Fortune 500 companies across South and Southeast Asia. She has played a role as trusted advisor to corporate leaders and CXOs and been featured among the 2019 list of top 50 most powerful PR professionals in the country. We have Dr. Vidur Mahajan, a key member of CARING, the Center for Advanced Research on Imaging, Neuroscience, and Genomics, which works in more than 25 research groups across the world and aims to bring cutting projects in the area of genomics. So, you know, it's a wide range of people that we have here. Ajay Mathur is Senior Vice President and Head Finance, Urban Company. Urban Company is India's largest online marketplace for home and beauty services. You might recognize their brand name better. And he's also responsible for driving partner welfare initiatives. Sandeepan Chattopadhyay, former founder, Zelform Design and Tech, a winner of the Red Hat Innovator of the Year. Over the years, he has helped technology development at various startups as well as new initiatives across Hyundai, Tata Teleservices, Tata Motors, CRISIL, Deutsche Bank also for Mr. Sanyal, and Edelweiss. And today's moderator is Pranjal Sharma, economic analyst and writer. More importantly, a very dear friend. Mr. Sharma is the author of India Automated, an economic analyst and advisor. He serves on the board of enterprises and non-profit entities which are leveraging emerging technologies for sustainable and economic growth. He is a visiting and guest faculty at several postgraduate schools. So this is the panel that I have introduced. I took 1 minute extra. I'm sorry, but there was so much to say about each person. But now may I welcome Peter to share his remarks. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Dilip. Ladies and gentlemen, well, let me start by saying that I do not like the terms disruption or social distancing, among others. I don't want to recognize that as the new normal. Social distancing has been confused with physical distancing, while the term disruptions tends to impart an underlying sense of chaos or even anarchy to the radical change, whatever dimension it is applied to, at least in theory. We all know nothing is more sustainable than the change. That change could be an evolutionary one, it could be a revolutionary one, it could be man made, it could have natural causes. Man made changes can be due to reasons like advance of technology, beginning from the invention of the wheel, and in that sense, the IT revolution is one to albeit a positive one, and I would rather call it transformation than disruption. While the jury is out on whether this pandemic is a natural one or a man made one, it is quite clear the disruptions have been massive and multidimensional in nature and totally in a negative sense. And hence, the pandemic has been, is, and will continue to be for some time to come totally disruptive. On other occasions during the run of this new normal series, we have talked about the manifold changes the COVID 19 pandemic has ushered in mostly disruptive rather than transformative way. At least for the time being, and to continue on a positive note, the restrictions the virus has placed on our day-to-day lives, on our consuming habits, and our industrial productions have opened up a wide window of opportunities for new technologies to prove their worth. I imagine that when we read the title of today's webinar, who has used the term webinar before, the first things that come to mind are those platforms that we have by now become so used to conducting our conferences on. How many of us had even heard of, let alone used Zoom, Cisco, WebEx, whatever similar services before the pandemic? This particular technology has become an integral part of our work life virtually overnight. And as Dilip has just said before, one of the side effects is, at least for Fiki and Kas, it has increased our cooperation using those opportunities opened up by the crisis. And now, looking into the old giants, Facebook, WhatsApp, they try to catch up. Is probably the fastest ever case of market disruption and adaptation, if we look at those in comparison. But there is no fast adaptation where the disruptions of global supply chains are concerned. Attempt to visualize beyond the proverbial curve brings us to nation thinking of gated globalization, wherein some countries are expelled as links from the global or regional supply chains, new national links inserted in the value chains, localization of essentials at national levels, or even as a part of the larger regionalization and globalization. All points we have addressed in earlier sessions of this series. Coming back to the digital innovation, for now, these technologies are nothing more than stopgap arrangements as we expect to come back to a new or even the old normal in the future. But in one of the earlier webinars of this series, one panelist explained that if humans have experienced a change in their surrounding for a certain period of time, that change will become permanent. So there is the possibility that this is not a makeshift arrangement, but really our new normal. Let me have a look at developments in Europe and Germany. Europe can neither compete with the production output of countries with large workforces such as India, the US, or China, nor does it possess natural resources in an internationally meaningful abundance. Instead, Europe prides itself in being innovative. It is our know-how that is the key to our economic development and our success. And an innovative economy carries a price tag. In the process, Safeguards are needed for both the disrupted and the disruptors. And case to the point is the recurring topic, of course, in German political debate being structural change. Coal mining and steel has been an important part of the economies of regions such as the Rhine-Ruhr Valley in Western Germany, our iron lung. To use COVID now, if you look at the entire sector, it is the iron lung. So the lung had its COVID attack many years ago already by different disruptions. The US may call it the Rust Belt. I think the iron lung has some more positive connotation in it. These industries, though in decline for many years, still carry the livelihoods of entire regions, technological and societal change. Alternative technologies and the necessities of climate change have rung the death knell of coal mining and processing and now threaten to plummet countless families into at least economic uncertainty and hardship. This is replicated at a smaller scale across the board. German industry is changing. Most production is easier, and it has to be admitted openly, cheaper done abroad. We are trying to change into a nation of highly skilled specialists and innovators, high tech and services instead of steel and coal. Angela Merkel, our chancellor, has called it, I use first the German word, Bildungsrepublik, translated like it's an education republic. When we talk about market disruption, the bigger danger of these developments on a national level are the social disruptions. We cannot just think in terms of economical necessities. With every technology, with every change, we have to think about the social repercussions. Let me take an actual example. Made in China is not so popular in the moment, and this 100% check policy, of course, leads and will lead to a market disruption in India. But it's intended, but the repercussions could be on the poor people who could not afford more expensive products, maybe from Japan or elsewhere, what are not produced in India. So it could be one of the repercussions. Or another more historic example, the term made in Germany. It was invented in Britain in the 1880s by the Merchandise Marks Act in a very similar intention to keep German products out of Britain and have to mark them made in Germany, that they're recognized and buy British. The opposite was achieved because the result was totally opposite. Made in Germany tag was standing synonymous of product reliability and quality. And the intention they had with that disruption did not take place. So COVID-19, to come back to the actual crisis, showed us that we need to be able to adapt to new situations quickly. And I believe around the globe, humans have shown how resilient and transformative they are. But there will be long-term implications, which we probably cannot fathom yet, but it's imperative that we do. I've given more a macro view on the issues we are debating today, yet the point remains the same. Especially in times of rapid change, we cannot let ourselves get carried away by the perceived necessities of change. Most of them we have it within our power to manage change to make it acceptable for a broad majority. And we at the Konrad Adenauer Foundation believe that we also carry a responsibility to manage that change accordingly. Maybe this was a very German definition or thinking of programs, what I presented here, but that one also comes with its downsides. Our decision making is not as fast as, for example, China's. And as I have explained, citing the example of the shift away from coal mining, it takes time. But this is worthwhile when we take into account the immeasurable worth of a harmonious social development. And I think that's also somehow deeply engraved in the Indian soul. So ladies and gentlemen, let us face it, for disruptions to become transformative, be it about of the market or otherwise, this tenet will always hold the human ease of living-centric technological innovation will be the call and need of this very minute, maybe not the hour or the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter, for those remarks. It's a great pleasure and honor now to invite Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, Principal Economic Advisor, Ministry of Finance, Government of India, to address us. Thank you again, Mr. Sanyal, for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here to speak to all of you. So thank you, Dilip, and all of you for giving me this opportunity. What I'm not going to do here, as I mentioned earlier, is to list out various government policies. You read about them in the newspapers every day and hear me drone on about it on television. So what I will do is, given the nature of the topic, talk about disruption and how governments deal with them and think about them, at least here in India. The reason I want to do this is that hopefully you will get a sense of how we are thinking about this issue. It will hopefully give you a sense of why our responses are the way they are, and give you a sense of what we are likely to do in future. And hopefully you will be convinced as well that we are not as crazy as many people think we are. So what is it that we are dealing with? Now, remember, what we are dealing with is enormous disruption, which means basically we are dealing with huge amount of uncertainty. Uncertainty about how things are panning out right now, and uncertainty about how they will be in future. Now, given this enormous amount of uncertainty and lack of knowledge, how do we take decisions that impact, we know, 1.3 billion people? Now, the response we have had for both the economic and the health problem are analogous. And I'm going to try and illustrate first with the health response. And you will see we have a similar philosophical framework for the economic framework as well. So to understand this, let us go back to middle of March. What is the information that we had at that point in time? We knew that something quite nasty and drastic had happened in Wuhan in China. We didn't know exactly what. There are still questions about exactly what had happened in Wuhan. But we did know that whatever had happened had spread to northern Italy, and it seemed to be killing a lot of people. We also knew that this was beginning to spread to other parts of Europe, and we were beginning to also see the occasional case turn up here in India. That was effectively the sum total of knowledge that we had in mid-March. And I don't think anybody else had a better idea than that. Now, given that information, what do we do? So, well, we, not like many other governments, also asked various experts. And so there we got a range of outcomes. There were models of epidemics experts who showed us that maybe as many as hundreds of millions of Indians would be impacted by this and would be infected by June. And large numbers, maybe running into hundreds of thousands of people, maybe even millions may in fact be dying from this. That was one type of impact. There were others who claimed that maybe this was just a very severe flu. Then the responses that we were expected to have ranged from, well, go for something in the nature of herd immunity to much more drastic approaches as well. So there was a whole range of outcomes. And the main thing that we understood from all of that was that really we had no idea. We had to take decisions in an environment of extreme uncertainty. So now there are two ways to deal with that. One is that you opt for what you think is the most sensible model of the various models presented to us by the experts, and opt for one of them. Now, different countries did different things. So that's how you had, for example, Britain took the herd immunity approach initially, and then changed its tack. Sweden took a certain, what became later known as the Swedish model, and that's still playing itself out, and there's still a lot of controversy about what happened. Germany did something different. Singapore tried a certain approach and then changed its approach completely halfway through, and so on and so forth. Now, here in India, of course, we have not only limited resources, we are also dealing with 1.3 billion people. So we have a problem in that once we opt for whatever model we were going to opt for, we couldn't suddenly change tack like, say, Singapore. So what do? So we opted for something called a barbell strategy. Now, those of you who are from a financial background will know exactly what it is, but those who are not, let me explain. A barbell strategy is one where you do two things simultaneously on two opposite ends of the spectrum. On one hand, you take policies that hedge out the very worst outcomes to the extent you can. And on the other side, you respond step by step, depending on how the evolution of events take them out to be. So now let me show you how this translates into what we did. What we did was we introduced a very severe lockdown, much more severe than many other countries did, for 3 weeks. Remember the very first lockdown. What was that? That was the first part of the barbell, hedge out the very worst outcome. We did not at that stage know whether this was going to kill millions of people or not. So you hedge out the very worst outcome. We weren't sure that this was necessarily the only or even the most optimal outcome. We did know that it would buy us some time to figure out what was going on. So that time, we got in place some testing. We bought ourselves some time for putting some quarantine measures in place. And of course, an information gathering system from internally, but also from other countries to see what was happening. Now, once that was put in place, we then have since then, initially gingerly, but now more recently, more systematically, begun to open things up. And that was done through a step-by-step feedback loop. So as we get more feedback, we open things up step by step. And we have now opened things up quite a lot, as you know. Now, many people then ask us, why are you opening up things now when there are so many more cases than you were doing in the beginning when you had very few cases? Well, that is exactly what you should expect in a barbell strategy. In the beginning, we did not know very much about what we were dealing with, so we took a very strict approach. As we have had better information, even though there are more infected people now, we can make informed trade-offs. We know, for example, that it is extremely infectious and how it spreads. We also know maybe that its death rates are better for most people than many people had feared in the beginning, at least from the information we had from Northern Italy in the beginning. We know that there is, however, that for one or two demographic categories, like old people with comorbidities, it is very, very dangerous. But a healthy young person perhaps is not so much in danger of dying from this disease. So there's a whole bunch of things we now know. We also have much better idea about the need for oxygenation and so on and so on. We have a lot more testing in place. I think with the exception of the US, we are testing far more people every day than any other country, and so on and so forth. So we have some sort of a sensible response in place. And so with that in place, we can now make trade-offs, not only on the health front, but also on the economic front, because of course, a shutdown like this has huge economic costs. It also has health costs, by the way, because never forget the fact that this is not the only disease making its way through. There are other diseases still happening, whether it's malaria or cancer. So there are all kinds of trade-offs that can be made, but we can make these trade-offs now because we have a lot more information. So to recap, what do you do in these situations when you deal with such an uncertain situation? Well, one option that we opted for is hedge out the very worst and then respond step by step. Now, let me now show you how this translates when we deal with an economic situation. Well, again here, we took 2 or 3 decisions in the beginning. One is that we made the assumption that this was not a sprint, but a marathon, which is the reason we took a somewhat different option from other countries who may have come out with very big packages in the beginning in terms of reinflating demand. We took the option that no, there was no use. This was going to be a marathon, and therefore simply doing one large demand inflation effort in the beginning, especially when we are actually doing policies like a lockdown, which are demand destruction policies by definition, there is no point in doing that. We had to, in fact, do that much more step by step. So what we focused on was doing the barbell, which is try and cushion for the vulnerable sections of society as best as we could. So our very, very first things that we did right in March was made sure that the very poor have some food physically reaching them, gas physically reaching for them, making sure that health insurance of some sort is provided to them and to people who are dealing with health workers, sanitation workers who are in essential services, and of course, delivering some cash to them directly through the Jan Dhan system. What are we trying to do? Well, let me be clear. This is not an attempt to reinflate demand doing by this. We are aware that this won't do it. We are trying to cushion things for them. So be clear what our options, what we are trying to do. We are cushioning things for the very poor by doing this. At the same time, we had to do this for industry as well. So the very first things we did was, well, we made sure that there were some financial deadlines coming up. We pushed them back by several months so that at least those financial deadlines didn't trigger problems. Then we began to create various kinds of moratoria. Then we put in abeyance the insolvency and bankruptcy code. Why? Because we recognize that the last thing we want is a cascade of defaults happening at this time because of payments problems and so on. So again, we push that back. This is again, notice, this is not an attempt to reflate the economy. This is an attempt to cushion the economy. And since then, we have announced a whole bunch of things that are related to cushioning the system, which includes, by the way, our attempt to create a buyer of last resort through an SPV for the NBFCs. This relates to, for example, for MSME sector, the 3 lakh crore 100% guarantee provided by the government so that they get some credit going through to them. This relates to the fund of funds we have created of sub-debt to provide some credit so that the smaller business has some way of infusing equity into their business so that they can leverage it and so on. All of this we recognize are cushioning strategies for making sure that the business, but particularly MSMEs, remain alive through this major shock. Now we reach the point where we need to begin to rebuild. But before we begin to put in the major rebuilds, you need to also know our intellectual framework in this. The first and important thing to understand in this is that we are clear that we are not going to be reflating the pre-COVID world. The post-COVID world will be fundamentally different. The shock that we have just gone through globally, not just in India, but globally, is as big a shock as there's been since the Second World War and the Great Depression. So since the Second World War and the Great Depression, we have not had a reset of this kind, not even the 2008 financial crisis. So we have to take that into account. So this is a reset, which means that the world we will emerge into will have a different geopolitics, it will have different technologies, different consumer behavior, different supply chains. So since we are not attempting, therefore, to reinflate the pre-COVID world, how do we, in this extremely uncertain world, do policy? Well, the first thing is we should not then have preconceived notions about what is it that we are trying to, what world we will emerge into. Instead, we need to invest into flexibility and resilience and domestic capacity. Those things will matter more in an environment of radical uncertainty than being able to tell exactly where we are headed, because we don't really know. We don't know this, you don't know this. But what we can do is invest in flexibility. So that is the context in which, by the way, you see the reforms we are putting in place. We are investing into, for example, labor market flexibility. Why labor market flexibility? Well, because we know that people have to be able to the labor has to be redeployed in completely new ways in this new environment. This does not mean we are throwing labor laws all into dustbin, no. There are certain areas where we're going to strengthen them. For example, in areas like safety or workplace working conditions. But in terms of flexibility, we will definitely encourage it. Same thing we are doing, for example, in agriculture. What are we doing? We are introducing flexibility by getting rid of the Essential Commodities Act and the APMC Act so that we create an environment where the primary sector can the farmers, who are after all also businessmen, can sell their products as they wish. People who are in the supply chain, the traders, can store and not store or invest into storage as they wish, without being told where to sell their products, what price to sell them, and how much stocks to hold. After all, none of you will be able to do business if we asked, say, the car manufacturers to sell their cars only in a mandi at a fixed price, the way we tell farmers to do it. So why should we ask farmers to do it? So we have completely begun to dismantle this. Same thinking goes into the way we are opening up mining. We recognize that there are areas that we have resources, domestic resources, and while we do want to retain our commitments to environmental issues, and we are serious about them, we also do need to exploit to some extent some of these resources with the resilience being an important part of our thinking process. We do need to maintain a certain amount of mix in our energy for our energy security purposes. Then, same thing we are doing with privatization. In the past, governments have been extremely mealy-mouthed about it, as you know, and we have used all kinds of euphemisms like disinvestment to describe this. This government has come and talked about privatization clearly. Now, this doesn't mean we'll privatize everything. There are strategic sectors where we will not want to privatize, and we have clearly said that we will retain up to 4 major public sector companies in strategic sectors. But on the hand, there is of course the financial sector, which is completely separate, where we'll also, I think, maintain significant public sector presence in the foreseeable future. But there are many sectors where there is no reason for public sector being there. For example, why on earth should governments run hotels? So many of those areas, we are quite open that we will begin to privatize things as and when the opportunity arises. We are not going to rush into it. We recognize this may not be the best time to privatize everything. But as the market conditions and things improve, we have the intention of privatizing here. We are also opening up certain sectors like space, like atomic research and so on, where previously private sector was not allowed. So again, why are we doing this? Well, the idea here is, again, all about resilience and the ability to respond. Now, in this context, before I end, I will say there are 2 words that came in, which is Atmanirbhar Bharat, or self-reliant India. And as you know from my writings, the whole idea behind self-reliant India is not, by the way, to go back to Nehruvian self-reliance and autarky. That is not the case at all. The Prime Minister has made it clear that his view of Atmanirbhar Bharat is very much about participating in international supply chains and encouraging FDI. But it is, on the other hand, about maintaining resilience. When I talk about resilience, it means that we will protect certain input industries and certain basic industries needed for the resilience of our sectors. We will put in effort to create capacities onshore that may be through foreign investment, by the way, but onshore capacity to manufacture in certain sectors, for example, in defense and so on. So there is a very much effort will be made in terms of creating domestic clusters. It also means when we are talking about be vocal for local, the idea is to have a much more decentralized approach to things. Again, a difference with the earlier attempts to, of import substitution, etc., that may have been done in the 50s. We are definitely not, this is definitely not about the planning commission telling you from the commanding heights, the principal economic advisor sending a firman about who should invest where. Far from it, we want it to be a decentralized process where the states, the municipalities, companies, even individuals take their decisions at their level to do things. And this is very, very much the model that we are trying to encourage, that things happen in a decentralized way. So while the central government will provide framework issues where we will want to invest, we do want competitive federalism. We want states to compete for business, compete for workers even. So I think this is what the model is all about. With that, I hope I have been able to give you some sense of our thinking process that we are using. It's about essentially, hedging for the worst on one hand and On the other hand, a flexible feedback loop based system. Those again are from a IT background will know this as agile. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Sanyal, for sharing the perspective and the thought process behind what government has done and also the different steps, and of course, ending with the phrase agile. Right? So with that, I'd like to thank you, and Pranjal, can I hand over to you now for you to take it forward? Pranjal?
Sure, thanks, Dilip. So, Sanjeev, before you leave us, I thought a couple of thoughts on what you said and questions. So, I think very, very articulate explanation of where we were. Everybody today, people might argue whether lockdown was good, bad, or ugly, but when it was being done, I think we did it with the best intentions of the information available. But in terms of disruption, Sanjeev, what's fascinating today is that we are facing internal disruption as well as external, even without COVID. In a pre-COVID situation, global value chains were under severe stress thanks to the trade war which had broken out between US and China. And with China's misbehavior with India, as we've seen, there is now a pressure between India's economic relations with China. So if you put US, China, India, everybody together, we are facing economic disruption at a multilateral level, at a macro level, and of course at a micro level. Is there a point in history where something like this has happened before, which could guide what we should do now?
So those of you who have read my writings over the years, both as an economist and as a historian, will know I have always argued against the idea of an equilibrium. So never mind about there being a new normal, there never was a normal. So we are not emerging to a new normal because being in flux is the order of the day always. And it's only in hindsight everybody is very wise and something appears as normal. When you're living through history, nothing appears as normal. So be very clear about that. Now, having said that, this may be, even by the standards of being in flux, an abnormally high level of flux. And now, in that environment, as I said, there have been many resets in the past. The fall of the Berlin Wall was a major reset for the world. So was, the end of the Second World War, which had been preceded by, of course, the First World War and even before that, and in between the wars, the Great Depression. So there are these major resets through history. Now, in some ways, the reset we are going through right now is in those kinds of scales. We have to begin thinking about those scales. The COVID may have triggered maybe the nearest trigger of many of these things, but they were already in place. There were already discussions happening about the place of international organizations. I mean, the US was already questioning the nature of them. And now it is, of course, disrupting them, WHO and so on, much more openly. Now, people may not like President Trump's personal style, maybe, but I don't think he is precipitating something that may have happened anyway. Same thing is happening with technologies at multiple levels that are happening, that, we are talking now about people now using much more, using these digital visual platforms for education, for example. Now, maybe this COVID has forced this change, but it was in the works for a long time. I mean, people have been talking about this for quite some time. And why should we all go to expensive universities to study stuff that is already on YouTube? So, these kinds of discussions have been going on for quite some time. And of course, there are, additive manufacturing discussions that have been going on for quite some time. Why do you need these complex international supply chains when you should be able to manufacture anything anywhere using additive technologies? Now, some of these may work, some of these may not work. But all I'm trying to tell you is all of this was in the works. The fact that COVID triggered this is just almost a trivial thing. And, geopolitical change is also a constant. Every few decades, there is a reset. So the fact that we may be going through another geopolitical reset after, the Berlin Wall and the fall of the USSR, we were perhaps due one anyway. So the point I'm making here is that how all of these disruptions interact amongst each other and events play themselves out is actually simply impossible to predict. You may take a few guesses, but for governments to pick winners is very, very difficult. So therefore, the thing that we as a government can do, and we may be forced to pick a few winners here and there, but by and large, our biggest job is to do the following things. First, to encourage risk-taking by the private sector and create the best possible environment for them to experiment and try out various things in a decentralized way. This is also true of the states. They can differently try out different models. One of them will work. Whichever one works can be scaled up. But we shouldn't get in the way by having some top-down planning commission view that this is how the 5-year plan of how the world will pan out will be. We do not have a view on this, and in a complex world, we should not attempt to do this. Same thing is, we need to, for example, invest in things like contract enforcement, the judicial system. I keep telling people that the single biggest investment that the Indian state should make is in contract enforcement and in the legal system. Why? Well, in an extremely uncertain and changing world, the only thing that is ultimately of any surety is the contract. Your ability to enforce contracts between large numbers of different people between themselves. That matters. The ability of the financial system to support risk-taking, therefore the insolvency and the bankruptcy code and its ability to deal with failures matters. So these are the kind of second-order things that the state should be investing into, rather than us wasting time telling you what exactly will happen in the future.
Sajeev, my second and final question refers to what you said just now about risk-taking. You know, the social contract between government and society, civil society and the business, we were moving towards globally as well as in India towards the minimum dependence on government. But COVID is forced and turned us 180 degrees to a situation that virtually every segment of society and business is now increasingly seeking dependence and demanding support and help from the government. Now, how do you see this playing out? Because are we then going to see a situation where while you're opening up the sectors for more and more enterprises to enter sectors where they were not allowed, we also have this other force where everybody wants something to be done for them by the government?
So the state always has a role to play. All successful societies throughout history have had the state play an important role. The question is, what is the role that the state plays? The state plays the role of enabler. It plays the role of providing public goods. And in situations like this, it plays the role of a safety net. Even the most libertarian of thinkers like Hayek have always made this point clear. The fact that you want freedom for risk-taking does not take away the important role the state plays for carrying out all these other things. In fact, risk-taking is only possible because you are able to, the state is there guaranteeing contracts, it's there as a safety net, it is there. So if you look at the way we have tried to do things, we are doing exactly the same thing. That's why I mentioned to you, the investment we have put into the cushioning part of the thing is a very different from the rebuilding part of the thing. We are very conscious of our role as a safety net. This is, by the way, true both for business, but also for individuals. So if you look at what are the things over the last several years this government has invested into, it has invested in the JAM Trinity. What is it? It is an ability it is a mechanism for being able to make sure that the bottom of the pyramid can be provided basic amounts of money, cooking gas, etc., to keep them going through a period like this. And by the way, we have been very successful through this. Let's face it, we have been in lockdown now for 3 months, 1.3 billion people in lockdown, despite all the problems we have had, maybe migrants going back or whatever else may be happening. But social stress has been minimal for the things that we have actually pulled off. Other societies you can see, with much less disruption, they have had all kinds of much more stress. So we have pulled it off because we created this. Similarly, Atmanirbhar, there be the idea of health insurance, for example, for all. Basic health insurance. Again, the idea there is of a safety net based system. The same logic, by the way, we are applying to the 100% guarantee. It's a safety net idea. By the way, I will draw a distinction here between this safety net idea and maybe some other economists have talked about is, say, a universal basic income. Universal basic income is a totally different way of thinking about it. It is not a safety net, it is a basic income. Now, from a safety net perspective or Atmanirbhar Bharat perspective, universal basic income is a dependence idea. And therefore, the two are actually diametrically opposite views of the world. And to the extent possible, this government avoids doing dependence. We try to do safety nets. So if you want to understand how we respond to various situations, always remember this. Now, going forward, as we go into the rebuild phase, we have done some supply side measures. We will perhaps now move into, as we remove the lockdown, we will be in a position to do more demand side measures and reinflate demand. But remember this issue at the back of your mind, that we are always trying to encourage risk taking. We are always trying to build out demand indirectly through maybe monetary policy and lowering the cost of capital, because we want you to go and do to take risks, and we want to provide cheap capital to do it. But there are areas where the state will intervene, for example, in creating basic infrastructure. And there is somewhere where the government needs to step up and put in its effort, even use its balance sheet if necessary, to be able to build necessary infrastructure for the country.
Thanks, Ajib. I think that's a very fine point about the difference between dependency and safety net, and I hope people keep that in mind. The various industry bodies, including FICCI and others, at every level who are asking for support. So I think that's a great point. Thanks so much for joining us. We will now proceed with our panel discussion. Please feel free to stay on as an enlightened listener. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm now going to go on to the next part of our webinar and have a chat with some of our achievers across both government as well as the private sector. And I'm going to request all of you, I'll come to each of you in the order of the program, but I'll request that since it's a panel, I'd like it to keep it as pacey and dynamic as possible. And to that extent, request all of you to, at any point, speak only for 3 to 4 minutes so that we can come back to you again with more ideas which have been infused by thoughts of fellow panelists. So I'm going to begin by requesting Mr. Yaduvendra Mathur, who is a retired IAS officer from, he was Special Secretary at Niti Aayog. Mr. Mathur, you were referring earlier to the whole relationship between the state governments and the national government. So in this situation, do you see a reset? Do you see a fresh configuration? Do you see a change in the relationship between center and state? And what I referred to earlier to Sanjeev as well. Do you see that the dependency on states on the center is going to be now at a different level and not what we would ideally like it to be?
Yeah, thank you. I don't think we have too much time to, because a lot of time was taken in the just repeating about what the government is doing, and I thought the focus was more on markets and about new products. So my sense is, as you rightly said, that the innovative disruptions, apart from a few key sectors and entertainment and hotel industries, which have been directly impacted by COVID, as soon as this thing, and this will blow up and this will transform, the new normal would not really be bringing in too many new products. So we'll definitely, we are still looking at not too many products disrupting the market. Having a Zoom or a new normal of telecommunications, that is great. But still, I still feel that the typical traditional marketplace products will still remain. And established industries in India should thus should not be too unduly perturbed, but they should go around and being more competitive than what they were earlier. So my sense is there is need for captains of industry to see that they bring in the efficiencies in the normal way. Even let's say the automobile industry, while there would be a transformation towards electric mobility, but still the typical auto industry strength in India cannot be lost. And we need to thus build on our own core capabilities where we are industry world leader. And I like what Rajiv Bajaj says, that on the auto sector and some of these traditional industries where our manufacturing, 50% of our manufacturing base was automobiles. So this is not the time to kind of completely disrupt that sector, but just see that we are able to capture new markets and more capture of the value chain in auto sector happens. Similarly, in the traditional sectors like textiles, for decades we've been trying to move away from from cotton fiber to a man-made fiber. So some of these structural transformations in our economic landscape are happening, and my sense is we should not get too disturbed post-COVID scenario. We will revert back to a normal, and that normal is definitely a much more competitive normal, a much more cutting edge normal, and bring in more productivity of labor, and definitely do a better job than what we were doing in our typical manufacturing sector. But having said that, I do feel concern for the hotel industry, for the tourism industry, where we would take a hit. So I think it is in those areas that we will need to provide that market and that brand building as a state and as a country, so that we do not lose on these traditional sectors which are employing a large number of people. And lastly, in the agriculture, we need to bring in high tech in agri and reduce the drudgery, bring in farm mechanization. So my sense is, even in the post-COVID world, we need to not lose sight of the basic strengths of our manufacturing and of our economy and build up on that.
Thank you. I think that's a good sweep of various sectors and how they're impacted. I'm going to bring in my good friend Tanmoy over here now. Tanmoy, the group that you represent is across every sector, and perhaps sectors which haven't even been invented yet. So, what's fascinating is in a time of disruption is that there are two thoughts. One is that large companies and legacy companies tend to get lost behind because smaller, more agile companies tend to go ahead. Simultaneously, there's this other thought that you have more resilience, and large companies are able to manage transitions and change better because you have the resources and you have a long-term view. And smaller companies, even if they're startups, tend to get lost because suddenly they're starved of either consumers or starved of funds. In your view, Tanmoy, how is it going for the Tata Group? And how do you see, what kind of lessons are there that we can pick up from?
Thank you, Pranjal, for having me. Thank you, Dilip. I've been listening to the very fascinating discussions so far. I was just thinking about the fact that, in our lifetime, we are experiencing a kind of a world war situation without a single bullet being fired. And that's the magnitude of what is hitting us. And therefore, one gets to, introspect about the huge number of dollars and cents that are being spent globally on, arms and ammunition. And what good is all that when you have something like a pandemic to take care of crippling everything around us? And I'll use my 3-4 minutes that you've given me to share with everybody what we have been doing in the Tata Group. And as you correctly said, we are a basket of about 112 companies. And many of these companies are small, medium, large in size and dimension and business complexities. So if we take the example of, let's say, our flagship TCS, and what TCS did in this pandemic was to completely reinvent through, of course, a technology-driven platform that has indeed been set up by TCS now, where they've been able to make a tectonic shift of associates from workplace in the offices to working from homes without eroding the productivity of the overall organization. And in fact, if I can give you some numbers, out of a total work strength of 490,000 people in TCS, 150,000 people were actually moved from office space to their homes and continue to work by physically moving their desktops and getting them onto a secure network to continue their work. In addition to the 150,000, 125,000 more earlier were already equipped with laptops, so they very seamlessly relocated and worked from home all over the world. TCS is in 55 countries. And right now, TCS is actually looking at a very complex and secure network infrastructure, which basically plugs into a very heterogeneous network availability all across the world, and yet ensure confidentiality and security of operations of its workforce for the customers. So that's the way, there was a logistical exercise, a massive one, to relocate physically technology to homes of associates. And then simultaneously, there was a network infrastructure play, a very complex one, which integrated various providers from all across the world to be providing the seamless connectivity to the associate in the home across these countries. If you were to look at what we did in what we are doing right now in the airline and aviation space, in which we are represented both domestically and internationally, we are trying to create a completely touchless experience for the passenger, as little as interaction as possible. Again, using a fair amount of technology and artificial intelligence and a lot of tools that passengers would have to interface with as against people as they go through the journey of travel. So that's another area that you can look at. If you look at what we've been doing in the manufacturing space, a small subsidiary of Tata Motors has now got capability and actually rolling out ventilators instead of auto components in Pune. The Tata Autocomp company today has got the capability, and they are actually going to roll out ventilators as a part of their production line. So that's responding to the needs of the country. If you look at Tata Communications, they have come with a wearable device like a watch, which basically then forewarns the person who can be at a factory that what are the temperature and other attributes of him in person, and what is the ambient environment in which he is working, so that that becomes a very important tool for him as he works, practicing physical distancing in the manufacturing or the office environment going forward in the future. So there are several initiatives being taken to adopt to the life in the new normal, as you can call it, the new work environment, the new operating environment, and not only for its own people, but as well as for society as such. There are offerings emerging. For example, the Taj Hotels is coming up with a very interesting offering, which is people who are completely feeling suffocated working from home. Taj is actually redefining and creating office workspaces for a little bit of a change of environment for that person who is totally feeling stifled being at home, and in a very safe and secure work environment, giving a kind of a change as one of the channels of getting the people to come back and revisit and reuse the hotel and earn some revenue as a different offering. For example, Taj realizes that there's going to be a lot of people who will now want to drive to destinations of vacation, or instead of flying or taking trains as and when the trains start. So they are trying to prioritize some of the drive-away destinations as a potential proposition for people. So there's a lot of rediscovery and reinvention that's going on as a result of what has hit us, and every individual company is basically working very hard to adopt to the new normal, taking into account the directives of the government as they come out from time to time, as indeed also coming up with pretty innovative steps, each one up to his own, of how to adjust to the new environment. Sound, Pranjit.
Yes, sorry. So my instinct took over, were faster than my fingers on the button. So, Tanmay, the point was excellent. I think what's fascinating is that despite being such a large conglomerate, you have the internal flexibility and agility to change business models. And I think the best business model is one which caters to the immediate needs of the market. And I think that's a great set of examples that you've shared with us. And I'll come back to you on that a little bit. But let me go to Vidur Mahajan, Dr. Vidur Mahajan, who's both, I think, wears two hats of a legacy company as well as a disruptor. And I think the only example in this group who has self-disrupted, or at least self-disrupting itself, Vidur, both from your decades-old imaging company to now the use of artificial intelligence in imaging that you are leading, how has COVID made a difference to both the models that you had? And healthcare is now clearly the focus. How do you see this situation and challenge changing you and the companies that you work with?
So, Pranjal, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to share the virtual stage with stalwarts of the industry. So I've been thinking about what I would say in my 3 to 4 minutes over the past, half an hour, 45 minutes or so. And it comes down to, as I think Mr. Sanyal put it beautifully, you have to be flexible enough to tailor your business models to survive now, and then be resilient enough to tailor again your business models to thrive later. And many of the examples Tanmayji just gave are more examples of short-term survival, right? Like these are all we are all posed with an existential crisis right now. If we don't modify our businesses, our business models, if TCS does not work from home, then TCS stops existing. So so on the legacy company front, we are all about survival right now. 1 month ago, if somebody would have asked me, so as one of the things that we do at Mahajan Imaging is we run a very high-end genomics, genome sequencing lab. And it's very much focused on oncology, rare diseases, very fancy stuff. And when COVID started, my default answer was, no, we will not be doing COVID testing. And as of last week, we now do about 200 to 300 COVID tests every day. And again, we take a lot of pride in it because we've been able to convert ourselves very fast. But will I become long-term an infectious disease company? Maybe not. But short-term, yes, it's important for me to get this revenue to be able to pay salaries. So that's why, so this whole disruption conversation, there are so many short-term opportunities that come up, and then one starts thinking about the long term. Now, on the whole AI front, our AI vertical, which is caring, the Center for Advanced Research in Imaging, Neuroscience, and Genomics, it was always a very long-term play. And the good thing, the only probably good thing that COVID has brought about is, they say necessity is the mother of invention. In this case, necessity became the mother of adoption. In health tech, there are so many technologies that existed, but were not used as much as they could have been or should have been, simply because there is that driver that is needed, and telemedicine is one of those. Once you get people onto a tele platform, it's much easier to incorporate smaller aspects of AI. Even something as simple as detecting that a microphone is muted and giving an alert that your microphone is muted is a brilliant example of using very, very simplified technology. And now every doctor around the country is literally doing consults on a mobile phone, which was a dream for most health tech enthusiasts over the past at least 15 years. So I'll stop because I can keep going on and on this stuff, but just would like to draw this.
Looks like we've lost Vidur. So I'll come back. Sorry,
Yeah.
Vidur, we lost you for a second. Can you just repeat what you
Sorry.
said?
No, I was just saying that the way I'd like to push everyone to think is in terms of activities that drive short-term survival, and how either you use those activities and convert them into a longer-term strategy, like, can I now become an infectious disease company, or how can I make a process out of reinventing myself to live out this period, and we don't know how long this period is going to be. So just wanted to draw out that distinction, Pranjal.
Thank you, Vidur. I think that's great. What I would draw from that is that certain changes are going to be permanent, in the sense, as you said, that telemedicine will take off in a way never before, both on both ends, both the consumer, the patient,
Yep.
as well as the caregiver, the doctor, the healthcare service provider. Plus, I think the regulatory system, because the regulatory system was also
Correct.
extremely hesitant to move into new models, because it felt that there was a lack of faith and trust in the new concepts, and until there's proof, people don't want to go with it. But today you don't have a chance and the luxury of going through the entire process of validation. So I think they're two very good important points that you made. I'm going to come to Abhay now. Abhay, the work that has been happening in your company, we'd love to hear about what kind of lessons you've got in terms of managing the shift and the disruptions, and picking up from what Vidur said, how many of these changes are going to be temporary, and what kind of permanent shifts do you see?
So firstly, thank you for having me on the panel. It's quite a privilege. I think I'd go back to something Mr. Snyal said, and really struck a chord. The point he made about many of these changes waiting to happen and only needing a catalyst, right? So I would look at it slightly longer term, saying some of these changes, I think, made the point about universities coming online, etc. These were changes to have sectors waiting to get disrupted, and possibly this pandemic has provided that spark, that trigger. I think the other one, my favorite example, and this is mobility. We nothing over booking a cab on an app, which is exactly the opposite of everything we've been taught as we grew up, right? Don't stay in the stranger's car, be careful of people you talk to on the internet, but no longer. So I think one change, which is permanent and which is just probably accelerated, is consumer willingness to change habits to eliminate friction in their lives. Right? That is not going away anytime soon. It may be disrupted for a while, but it's going to come back, right? And that's what great business ideas are born from. I think in many cases business ideas come from problems which are very difficult to solve, obvious to many, but are solved by building solutions which require innovation, resources, and relentless execution. And that's where Urban Company came from. Urban Company, hopefully most of you are aware, is an online services platform, India's largest services platform, and came from the simple idea of how to provide reliable, safe, high quality experience while making sure the professional working on the platform is able to improve his earnings and earn a dignified and decent living, right? And that was the simple idea. Today, about 5.5 years old, we're in 4 countries, and we serve about 800,000 consumers a month, before the pandemic hit. I think what's unique about our model is that, we run a full stack model. We identify professionals, we train them, we provide them access to formal finance, which they never got access to earlier. We sort of bridge the link with the consumer and also provide them high quality products to use. We also make sure that, that we work for the welfare of these professionals. We train them in partnership with SDC. Out of every 100 rupees on the platform, 80 rupees goes to the professional, which is much more than what he used to earn earlier in a storefront or in a salon sector. Right? And 30% of our professionals are women, and we offer them the flexibility to work the hours they want and when they want. I think there are 3 or 4 clear principles, Pranjal, I would call out from here, which will stand the test of time. Firstly, you have to solve problems by first principles. You can't trade off easy and sustainable. You have to do sustainable. You have to invest for the long term. I mean, and make sure in these troubled times, you don't burn, but you invest, because the investment will, hold you in good stead for the future. Make the pie bigger for everyone involved rather than cutting it differently.
So, make sure that every stakeholder gets a bit more than he or she used to earn earlier, and that's a sustainable model. Continuously learn, see where innovation and ideas have been implemented across the world, and see how you can make them better. Coming to COVID, I think, all of us are going through Kubler-Ross's change curve model, right? So there's shock, denial, frustration, acceptance, experimentation, decision making, and finally integration. I think the winners will be decided by people who emerge from the cycle first. Great companies and leaders are already in the experimentation and decision phase. Trying new models, making non-productive costs go away, constantly listening to consumer feedback and how to build and motivate teams. I think all these changes, great companies are already making and experimenting. I think, what I'd like to end with is saying, what Darwin said. Darwin said that it's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but responsive to change. And that will play out now. At Urban Company, we've seen a steady recovery of business on our platform, but we've also been pivoting our practices, our SOPs towards consumer safety, making sure that consumer awareness to letting individuals out into their houses is taken care of, making sure our partners are taken care of, and also trying, new business streams which will find acceptance in the post-COVID world. Thanks.
Thanks, Abhay. This adaptability, and as you said, the shift that you have to make, and the faster you come out of the cycle. And I think in some ways it is size agnostic. You may be a large company as part of a Tata Group company, or you could be a small startup or a mid-level company. I think a lot of this is perhaps mindset as well, not just the capability and resources, because if you have the right mindset, then I think the ability to come out with positive approach and coming out with temporary solutions which move into midterm solutions to long-term strategy. I think all that depends on that. But let me come to Ms. Likha now and talk about a sector which is clearly most impacted. While Tanmoy referred to hotels and Taj, I think aviation sector and the entire range of hospitality and aviation is still the most impacted, while manufacturing and other services can take off. I think this will take a longer cycle to regain. So, Likha, if I can come to you and request you to share your views on how you see this disruption playing out for your company and your experience so far.
So let me begin by first thanking Fiki and Pranjal, especially you, for having me on this forum and giving me a chance to express my views with the esteemed panel here. So yes, rightly, as everyone has been pointing out, we are in very many ways going through unprecedented times.
So Likha, you're deliberate or accidental, but either way, I just thought I'll point it
out. My voice?
No, your video is not there, so I don't know whether you did it because of bandwidth issues or is it accidental?
That's right. That's right, Pranjal. Actually, I'm at work right now and we are going through some very vast data migration. So I haven't played the video. I'm kind of on audio at the moment. I hope that's okay.
Sure, go ahead, please.
Right. So as I was saying, we are going through some unprecedented times, and as pointed out by you, some of the verticals that are massively hit are these hospitality services and ourselves, which is aviation. Having said that, I always feel that such disruptions or such when these times arrive, when you have to make shifts, as they say, necessity is the mother of invention, and change and survival is all that counts. This brings on some, innovative ways or different ways of looking at how you can survive and make the most of the current scenario. Overall, aviation as such has been really sort of stagnant in a lot of ways. Airline business models did not see a core innovation happening in the past 50 years. So to say, the airline product, namely transporting passengers from point A to point B, had become slower, more cumbersome, more suspect. Aircraft sizes have decreased. But the corona pandemic, in a lot of ways, has changed all of this for us. So what did we do as an airline when it really struck us? And, during the starting March 24th, 25th, when the lockdown was imposed and all services stopped, we started looking at different ways of how we can make ourselves embed ourselves in the in the way the nation is going through this. What is it that we can do to really get our business rolling, even if it's by baby steps? So over a period of the last 4 months, while the lockdown got lifted and we've now started moving passengers, we've also indulged in new business models. Things like chartered flights is something that at Indigo we had never thought of. Today we are chartering planes, and this has become a very a good business model or a business line for us to think about taking it to the future. Similarly, digital disruptions. Now, a number of panelists have pointed out that while a lot of us are working from home, digital innovation for in terms of employees being comfortable at home, etc., have been looked into. We have looked at it more from a customer perspective. So your airports becoming touchless, your aircrafts becoming, so when a passenger is moving from his home to finally landing into an aircraft, how do you make that experience completely seamless, make it easy for him or her without having to come in contact with another person? So providing your boarding passes, your baggage tags, everything today has gone online. So digitization, which would have probably happened over a couple of years, has happened in a couple of months or weeks, I would say. That's been the next big shift. Over and above, it has all become about safety. So while initially when airlines said safety, it meant about the aircraft safety or the engine safety for aircrafts, etc. Today it's all about providing that safety aspect to the customer. What is it that what will make the customer feel safe? So providing your kits, sanitizing your aircrafts, just doing all of that to make sure that when the customer climbs into that airline of yours or the aircraft, he's completely trusting you to make sure that you deliver him from point A to point B in the safest possible manner. So I think as this corona pandemic continues, airlines planning departments have all gone into an overdrive. Whether it's about planning or reviewing options for now our restructuring. How are we, initially the plans were always looked at in a sort of an annual fashion, or planning for the next 2 years, 10 years. Now we're literally planning month on month. What is it that we need to do today to make sure that the next month we are coming out stronger than before? So really, I would say it's a lot of technology, digitization changes, ensuring that historical data is no longer is an information for the future. The option is to now start from scratch, literally, and move towards this new normal, and also completely ensuring the safety of your customers. So for us, it's now focusing on what makes your customer feel safe while you deliver him the best of your services, and kind of ensuring that the airline business moves now from, say, the current 30% to the next 50%, and hopefully to 80% by the end of the year.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think, unfortunately, this is the one sector where we've seen a few bankruptcies globally already. So I think the flexibility that you're showing is absolutely critical. Let me now move to Sandeepan Chattopadhyay. Sandeepan, coming to you, you've been a serial entrepreneur, a serial founder, and what has been common in your journey is that you created or enabled the creation of several models that were disrupting existing players. But now what we have is a situation where while the models themselves are disruptive, the ecosystem in which they rested itself is disrupted. So while you could have disruption in one place and stability in other, now you have disruptions on both ends, which would probably have a huge impact. So it's not just about your own company's Elpmog, but also the portfolio of companies that you have created platforms for. How has this shift in the last few months impacted what you think about disruption and the new models that could emerge?
Pranjal, as you know, that we have always believed in serving for the unserved part of it mostly. So for the next 700 million Indians or the next 3.5 billion worldwide. I think there's a renewed interest to understand that that part needs to be taken care much more and more adequately. So in a way, though it's a sad time to discuss it, I guess it has helped humanity or us, the advanced nations, to refocus on what is fundamental and what is important in life. So this entire thing of Excel sheet ruling over excellency, I think that has gone over, and people are getting back to the fundamentals. And we are talking of what has been Zeltmock's theme of HEAL, which is health, education, agriculture, and livelihood. For all you know, the new normal could actually be a reset for making sure that democratization happens in the right way. The entire fact that it's one way to look at it, the fact that you could go to a privileged college, and today, since all colleges are closed, you're getting access to the same kind of education, maybe a bigger equilibrium force than anything that we have seen in the past. So there are pros and cons to both sides. Personally, I believe disruption is pretty unbiased about the sides. When a new innovation happens, both sides get disrupted. Google has changed you as much as you have changed Google. So it's always a chicken and egg story, and there's a cycle to it. It's good that we don't have to find out the tail of the cycle in this case, because both sides are disrupted. So things are simpler. So we are coming back to what will serve the purpose, what will serve the need. Coming back to our portfolio companies, MeHoop, for example, has seen renewed interest in it because automation, touchless, having this sort of a speech to text, especially giving the power of compute to illiterate people. These are where hypothetical situations before, now they are absolute realities. So people want those solutions more, like the Tata Motors example of being able to use MeHoop is a very important selling point for them now, because mass market cars should have this sort of a low cost but high power technology. The agricultural solution we had done, I think there's a time for it, for having an appeal to all over India and not just Bengal, where we just rooted. So similarly, everything. The education thing we are doing especially is where we are under severe pressure to deliver something which is supposed to be seen in, let's say, end of December or beginning of January, being pushed to be, we needed day before yesterday, not even yesterday. So there's severe pressure, and we had to take quasi-static approaches where in some part of it we are deploying immediately as the schools try to reopen, but then regulations and all are being worked out, where in principle we do believe in certain things, but I can't think also of people not getting any form of education. And so that it's okay to disable a particular part of it. So there are certain things where disruption and and public policy have to go hand in hand to understand the new realities. So we are thinking of a new real, but the new real also has certain entailments and certain privileges which have to be stripped off, and we have to be cognizant of that. So I think it'll come, but there's a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction happening everywhere. It's good that it stabilizes, and once we accept, saying new reality and accepting new reality are different things. I think we are going into that acceptance phase, like someone on the panel was telling, and that's a change we are seeing. But overall, I guess we will see a lot of technology-enabled empowerment things, which will basically try to decentralize manufacturing, production, information dissemination, everything. And this vocal about local thing that was talked about by Mr. Sannal, I guess that's the mantra we have been living by. No matter what I did, I mean, after money control and all, I also was, as you know, the CEO for Just Dial. And we couldn't have got more multi-local than Just Dial for a certain period of time. So in that spirit of things, it's always important that to create new markets, innovation happen. This could be a great reset opportunity for India, wherein we can bring everyone back to the same level, or start off at the same level, not back to the same level. There's nothing to go back to. And certain things which were in the privilege but not used by people who didn't need it has found newfound use. Like you and I are using Zoom so often, and in many ways we are finding it more productive and less irritating for certain meetings. And that realization has come because we have been pushed to it. But if we are, suppose, hypothetically sent back to a pre-COVID kind of a scenario, would we really switch back to our habits? But would try to come up with a hybrid situation which is the best of both worlds. On the work front, as long as it's regular work, it's important and possible to work from home and all those things. But there are these cohesive and collative periods that you need when you're doing a creative, which surely is taking a toll and is becoming very strenuous. To coming up with a product definition and all is so much more difficult when you're geographically dispersed and you cannot have the flourish of your hand on the whiteboard to explain things, but have to write a 3-page document to prove the same point you could have done with just a pointer at the right place in the thing. So I guess we are discovering new ways of doing it. And sometimes, you are emulating kids because they have been doing it just to hide things from us and finding their own ways and saying. So I guess it's a kind of question of resetting and rediscovering. We are discovering facets of ourselves which have been triggered and catalyzed by this period. On the positive side, I think most people are more aware of their families than ever before, especially in our work sphere and all. And this has a nice positive ring to it in terms of overall flow and thing. So that's what I would like.
Well, thanks, Sandeepan. I think that's terrific to know. We have run out of time. We just have a couple of minutes, so I'm not. We don't have too many. We don't have time for questions. So what I'm going to suggest is that all of you, some of the questions which were sent to me, I have asked to the panelists as precisely as possible by synthesizing them. But what I would suggest is perhaps send your questions into FICCICAS team, and they'll be happy to forward it to the panelists and get a response from them. But to all of you, and also for Peter to have joined us and shared your thoughts and experiences, I think we can. This has been as expansive as it could possibly be across different sectors, from government to private sector, from startup innovation to what kind of global relations that have been changed. I think we've covered a lot of ground. I think we'll continue to have these kind of conversations because as we realize things are going to be in a temporary phase in the immediate, we'll have to live in the immediate for the next few months, talk about what's happening this week, next month, and the couple of months after. And perhaps by the time we emerge from it, we would have seen a new world which could change all the models that we had thought of, accelerated positive change, but hopefully we would have also learned to mitigate the negative change. Thanks again to all of you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Pranjal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pranjal.
Thank you,
Thank
Pranjal.
you.
Very much, Pranjal.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot, Pranjal.
Quite interesting. I think that the time flew.
Yes.